It is my absolute pleasure to be joined today by author Vincent Palmieri. He is the author of the newly released book, The King of Orchard Street. And so, Vincent, tell us about this book.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, the King of Orchard Street, I tell people often, I don't know, sometime I'm a movie fan of any kind, but the classic Alfred Hitchcock movie, Vertigo, in 1955, has been characterized as a love letter to San Francisco. The way it's shot, if you've ever been to San Francisco, from the top of the hills down to the water, and their hills. They shoot it at a place called John's Tavern, which is like the oldest operating business in San Francisco, one of them anyway. They shoot it from Nob Hill, from Coit Tower. It has been characterized as a love letter to San Francisco. And I tell people the King of Orchard Street is also a love letter. It's a love letter to the people that lived on Orchard Street. Orchard Street is in a small upstate New York village called Frankfort, New York, central New York. It's the north side of the village. It runs about, not even a half a mile. I'll say about 5 blocks, something like that. I tell people it's a love letter to the people that lived on Orchard Street. It takes place in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. It takes place in a different type of era. It's a love letter to those people and to the way we lived and to the values and the mores and the code that we live by. As a love letter, I feel that's a perfect description. It's an apt description. It's shot in local, it's told in, maybe someday it will be shot as a movie. It's told in different locales, businesses. It's told by, it's a street from the Erie Canal days, 1820s is really where it came about. And some of the businesses and some of the buildings at that time were still there. Many of them are gone now. Most of them are gone now, unfortunately. But it's kind of a love letter, as San Francisco is to, as Vertigo is to San Francisco. This is the same kind of thing. It's a love letter to Orchard Street on the north side of the village of Frankfort, New York, and the people that live there.
I love it. So, what was and you talked about it a little bit, but what was that main point of inspiration for you for writing this book?
It's something I thought about for a long time. I've written a book previously, a different type of book. It's called Ruthie Deeply, but it takes place to a great degree on Orchard Street too. And a lot of it takes place in Syracuse, New York, a place called Geddes, New York. It's a story I've had in my mind for many, many years, and how it really crystallized was, say about 4 years ago. I was in Maine with some relatives, and one of my cousin's sons, his name is Rob Marchone. He's an MD in Boston, and he's a super intelligent guy. He was valedictorian of his class at Colgate University. He's bright. And he said to me, "What are you doing with your book?" And I said, "Ruthie Deeply." And I said, "Geez, Rob, it's funny. It's almost done. A couple months or so, should be pretty good. What are you going to do with your next book?" So I told him about the King of Orchard Street. I said, but I wasn't sure yet. He said, "I got an idea. Take the 6 people, 10, whatever you want, it ended up 6. And they tell you their stories, and then you write their stories, again, in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. One of them is my uncle. He's 90, lives in Florida. Another one is a friend of mine, Richard. He's in his 80s. He lives in Florida. And the other 4 of us three are local here in upstate New York, and one is in Western New York, in Rochester, New York." So Rob, I said, "Give me your idea." So he said to me, "Tell the stories, and then the reader decides who's the King of Orchard Street," in a whimsical level, if nothing else. So that's where I said, "Rob, I think you got a good idea there." And like I say, this is a very bright guy. So that's what I went with. I got 6 of us. We told our stories, and the reader decides who the King of Orchard Street is. Now, people ask me, "Well, what's this criteria for how do I determine this?" And I say to them, "Well, who was the biggest rascal? Who caused the most intrigue? Who pushed it as far as they could, never to hurt anybody or, anything like that, or break laws or anything. Although came close a few times, I must admit. But that's the King of Orchard Street. Who is that person? In a whimsical way. There's not going to be a contest or an award, anything like that. That's the first level. that was one inspiration. And the other inspiration, as I progressed through it, I came to the realization that the way we lived was engrossing. We all families, probably at least half grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles and relatives like that. And we all took care of each other. We all accepted each other, even if you weren't a relative or weren't from there, original, born there on Orchard Street, like I was. You were accepted. The door was always open. We always had each other's backs. If you were outside, we didn't even go in the house. We just like lived outside. And if it started to rain, somebody say, come on in the house. You're going to get wet. Then you can walk home when you're done. Again, it's only about 5 or 6 blocks. Or if it was, very hot, they bring you water. Say, here's a pitcher of water. So that was the second inspiration. And that kind of came to me as I went along. The way we lived, the code, again, I say that all the time, the code we lived by was just, the door was always open. It was friendly. It was cooperative. We helped each other. If I got further ahead, my dad did, there was almost an unwritten rule, an unwritten obligation that you had to help the rest of your neighbors get further ahead. That doesn't happen in the world much anymore. The world is very divisive. The world is very segmented. On Orchard Street, that wasn't the case. It was the opposite. That was my second inspiration. And I didn't realize that till after I was going a little bit. And I said, I think I did unconsciously, but then it became conscious. And I said, this is a good thing. This is the direction that the whole world needs to go. If you have, I tell people that I speak to, if you have a lot of acceptance in your life, good for you. Put more in. But if you don't, start right now in your neighborhood, in your family, in your school, and then just expand that out into this beautiful green earth.
Oh, I love the message from that. That's an incredible message to share with everyone.
It is. It really is.
It also is a fun book. I mean, it sounds fun. It just sounds, it sounds hilarious. It sounds,
there's funny stuff.
Which one's the worst, Biggest Rascal. I love that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today about you, your book, or the message within the book?
I always tell the people that live in this area, again, I live in central New York, last week, we had a very well attended Meet the Authors special session at a local historical group. And 2 of the guys involved came with me. And I always tell everybody that comes, or even if they're not, I've asked the people previously, give me your favorite story. Well, one I like is one of the guys in the book's name is Johnny. There's my Uncle John, Johnny Tabia, and Johnny Kipper, all Johns. And then Johnny Carson pops up and whatever. So there were so many Johns. My wife said to me, why do you call him John? I said, because there was so many Johns. There was John, his Uncle John, his father John. There were so many Johns that you had to, figure out which one. So we called him John. Well, anyway, John's favorite story was his grandmother. Escargot is the fancy name for it. But in Italian, they call it babalouche, snails. Well, his grandmother was making snails for his grandfather one afternoon on a Sunday. And she put the pot on the stove and she turned up the water a little bit. She was trying to be kind to the snails and not like boil up, because they're alive, like a lobster, they're alive. So she put them in there in the cool water and she turned up the heat a little bit. She put the top on and she turned up. Well, at one point it was starting to get hot and she had turned up the heat quite a bit and she forgot to put the top on. So now she goes in the dining room or whatever and she's doing what she's doing. And she comes back 2 or 3 minutes later and the snails are all over the place. Well, that water's getting hot. They want out of there. They're climbing out. They're climbing up the wall. They're in the sink. They're all over the place. He said, my grandmother walked in the room. She sees it. She starts yelling and cursing at the snails in Italian, and she's throwing them back in the pot to finish cooking. He says, my grandfather walks in. He says, what are you doing in here? What are you doing? She goes, I forgot to. Well, to hear Johnny tell you, they're on the ceiling. They're crawling across the ceiling. He says, to hear Johnny, if you hear Johnny tell the story, the look on my grandfather's face and the look on my grandmother's face was priceless, was priceless. But there are 100, probably more stories like that. So it's very cute. It's amazing the way the stories cross each other. And again, the code we lived by and the uniqueness of the stories and that kind of thing. Again, was there ups and downs? Of course, there was ups and downs. People would move there and they would soon come to the realization that it wasn't exactly the spot for them. And they would leave of their own volition. They said, this is not for me. And they would go buy another house or move in another apartment and all of that stuff. It was unique. It was a little business district. There was 4 or 5 different businesses on the street that you could, corporations, I guess you would say, small scale corporations. There was a number of, from the old Erie Canal days, there was bars and restaurants and old hotels, because the Erie Canal is literally 200 feet behind. It's filled in now, but the parts of the Erie Canal that were back there, 200 feet from my backyard, from my house. So you stayed there, it was a self-contained little business district and entertainment district, and you just kind of stayed there. The only time you left is if you went to church, because the church was a few blocks away, and you walked over to the church and you came back. But it was a unique thing. It truly was a unique thing, a unique way to live again. And I say a love letter and a code that worked every day. Simple, just be respectful, be kind, be polite, help each other. No big boondoggle, Sometimes people think that for something to work, it's got to be super complicated. It's the opposite. The simple things are the things that work. So that's where it is. That's where it came from.
I love it. I love that just everyone would enjoy this book. It's such a special book. It's filled with all kinds of things. You write great message, funny stories, heartwarming stories at the same time. We want to let everyone know that this book, The King of Orchard Street by Vincent Palmieri, is available everywhere online books are sold. It's available on Amazon, Apple Books, Reader House, online at Barnes & Noble. We recommend everyone pick up this very special book today. And Vinny, you have been an absolute delight to talk to you.
It was fun, yes.
For joining me.
And we got this thing to work.
I know we did. Look at us. We're conquering today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, ma'am. You have a good day.
You too.
Bye now.